Howdy, folks. First video here talking about what is news. This is where we're going to make our jumping off point for our Journalism 101 crash course. If we're going to write news, if we're going to write for our yearbook or for our newspaper, we've got to understand, okay, what types of things should make it into these publications? What's newsworthy? So our learning goals are, we've got 3 of them for today. Number 1, I'm going to be able to identify hard news versus soft news. I'm going to be able to identify the 5 news determinants and use them to evaluate news stories. And then I'm going to identify the 5 aspects of a news story or an article. So let's start off with the different types of news. First off is hard news. These are things that people need to know. So if we're thinking nationally, right, national news publications might say, we need to know who was elected president, and we need to know if there's a forest fire or an impending hurricane coming in. Those are things that people need to know. Or if there's a change in policy or law that's going to affect people's lives, that's a journalist's responsibility, is to inform the public. But that's not all that there is for news. We go much deeper than that. We're going to get into something called soft news. And that's what people want to know. That's what keeps people kind of reading and scrolling through a news feed or a publication or a magazine, right? I pick up a magazine not because there's like life-threatening things that I need to understand, but I surf through a website because there's things that I find interesting. And so the best news publication starts to blend these two things where I'm taking things that people want to know, and I'm also integrating elements that, at least in our publication's opinion, people need to know as well. So there's 5 news determinants. So these are going to be the qualities that we're going to use to assess whether a story is worthy of publication or not. So first one is timeliness, where a news story is published recently. And this is going to be penned based on the publication schedule. So if we publish a newspaper every month, our timeliness is, did this story happen within the last month? If it didn't, it starts to lose timeliness. It starts to lose its quality of being a news story, right? I don't want to report on something that happened last year if I'm making this year's yearbook, right? Stay in the moment. Proximity means that events or something is happening close to our community, right? So proximity is anything that's going to affect students within senior high. Just in the same way that the Billings Gazette isn't necessarily going to publish articles solely about what's happening in North Carolina, right? We're going to focus on our region, even if we have like a national news section, right? It's going to be national news that maybe Montanans need to know. We're going to kind of curate that section for what people might find interesting. Consequence means that the news actually has some effect on people in our community, right? So if a news story affects or is related to people within senior high's community, that's going to have consequence. Prominence deals with kind of, I don't want to just say how important someone is, but kind of how prominent, how well known someone is, right? So our principal has more prominence than I do. Like, I'm one teacher of 100, but Mr. Earn is one principal among one, right? He's the most prominent person in our school. But it's not just about hierarchy or status. It's not like we're just going to interview people who are the cross-country captains and the football captains and are on the varsity volleyball team. Prominence can be made in a lot of different ways, right? If someone is a concert pianist, they're going to have prominence because they're going to be the only person in the school who is playing with the Billings Symphony, right? That gives that person prominence. And lastly, human interest is just anything that makes a human being feel an emotion, right? So maybe you have a news story that's not really of consequence, it's not affecting people's lives, and it's not happening to a really important person, but it's happening to someone at senior high and it's kind of interesting. That's probably worthy of a news story, right? That's bringing in that human interest. We want our readers to feel an emotion and know about things they wouldn't know about otherwise. It all just kind of depends on the scope of whatever publication we're doing. So we get to kind of determine that for our own publications. What types of stories do we want to publish? What do we think it's important for our news reading public to know? So where do we find these news stories? There's a number of places where we can generate ideas for news stories. And number one is just kind of keep your ears and your eyes open. Be thinking like a journalist. So as you're scrolling through your social media accounts, if people are talking about it on TikTok or sending snaps about it, that might be worthy of a news story. Any events or sporting events, club events that happen in and around our school, those can be ideas. What your peers do on the weekends, and like what are people passionate about. If we have a group of people who are really into skateboarding or hacky sack, or they get together and build their own computers, I don't know. Um, that could be a news story. What our staff is doing, and that goes beyond teachers, that goes to like janitors and counselors and administrators. What's going on with that aspect of our school? We could pay attention to local news radio or local print publications and see if there's something out in the community that's affecting our high school students or it could be important to our high school students. And one of the big ones is pay attention to the announcements. I know nobody listens to the announcements. No one listens to that little box that talks at us every morning, first period, except for you. As a journalist, you are now going to listen to the announcements and come up with ideas for news stories based on what you hear. And then lastly, make sure you're paying attention to all those clubs and start to make contacts. Like, who do you know who's in student council? Who do you know who's in chess club or environmental club or STEM club or senior advocates, right? Those people now become sources for things that might be interesting and going on in the school. All right, last piece, where we've got a news story and now we need to write it. What we're shooting for in our news writing is these 5 qualities. So number 1, our news stories need to be accurate. They need to be factually correct, right? And that burden of proof and accuracy is on you as a journalist. You need to make sure that you're getting name spellings right. You need to make sure that you're getting dates right. You need to make sure that you're getting the story straight and finding enough information that you're writing this well. We need to be balanced in our writing, where we're going to accurately portray as many viewpoints as realistically possible, right? So if something happens in the school, we might have people of different beliefs or of different standpoints that we should be working to provide, right? We are not just a publication for our friends or for our own viewpoints. We're a publication for all of the viewpoints here in senior high. And as that, we also need to be objective. We as writers don't get to put our opinions in here. We don't get to say this or that about the football team. We don't get to say this or that about what we think about a new administration rule, right? We get to report on what other people think, and we get to report on the facts, but we have to take ourselves out of this writing. So in no article are you going to write I or me. You have to take yourself out of those articles. We need to write clearly, where we stay on topic, we write concisely, we write for a level that's going to be appropriate for an incoming freshman, right? They are now our audience. So whatever our freshman reading level is, that's where our articles need to be written. And then lastly, we need to be relevant and relatable. If an article is accurate, balanced, objective, and clear, but no one cares, or it's not considered important, it's not really going to get read. It's not really going to be a good news story, right? So we've got to find some way to make these news stories feel current and relevant and relatable. All right. Good luck, folks.